Good morning, guys. Let's go ahead and take a look at today's objective. Today, we will be able to balance equations with absolute value. Notice how it does say two solutions. What that means is there are two possible answers for every single question. Like always, if you're able to print the lesson, fantastic. If not, now's your chance to go ahead and get that piece of blank paper, fold it into fourths, so that way you have room for 8 questions total. Also, remembering our 2 rules of everyone tracks, so pausing and rewinding whenever you need to, and everyone tries. Every single answer needs to have an answer written down. Also, after your exit ticket, today for Freckle Math, you will be completing fractions. Just so you know, those that have not been doing the Freckle Math, the beginning is 0 for that on their progress report, so make sure that you are filling that in. Let's go ahead and take a look at our very first question. Our first question on our do now is the following. We have x, or the absolute value of x minus 3 is 9. What you're going to need to do is actually solve for the variable, so solve for what x is equal to. Again, there are 2 possible answers here. It's okay if you're not sure what they both are, just have at least one answer written down. That is the expectation on your lesson. So we have the absolute value of x minus 3 is 9. What is the value of that x, or that absolute value, or that variable? Go ahead and pause it and resume the video when you're ready in the next 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and first, before we solve this question, talk about what absolute value is again, because it has been a few days since we've solved that. We've been looking at equations with variables. So first, just a quick reminder that absolute value is how far a number is away from 0. And that also means that the absolute value of a number is always going to be positive. If you have a negative number, we find the absolute value of it, it's positive. Just as a very, very quick review, if we have a number line here, and we label a positive and a negative side. Again, maybe just a 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for the negative side, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. If we look specifically at the number, let's take a look at 4. If we look at the number 4, we just need to find how far the negative 4 is away from 0. So how many jumps away is it? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning that the absolute value of negative 4 is 4, because it's 4 jumps. So we'd write that like this. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. That's it. And then if you want, you can even put a box around it, but we would not put extra bars like this, right? Because that's just finding the absolute value of whatever number that is. So even if we have a negative number, our answer is positive, right? So for our equation, let's go back to our do now very quickly here. Let's just erase this. Looking back at this question, this answer, this x, the variable, could represent a negative number or a positive number, which is why we have 2 possible answers here. One answer is going to be negative and one answer is going to be positive. Before we start reviewing this, I'm going to go ahead and just copy our question down. That way I can mark it up a little bit. So we'll have the absolute value of x minus 3 is equal to 9. Now, the easiest way to remember this is that there are 2 bars, two lines right here, right? And that shows that there are 2 possible solutions. It could be either a positive number or a negative number. So what we're going to do is just create 2 separate questions. We're going to start with that upside down caret there, and then we're just going to rewrite this, but without the little lines there, okay? So we have x minus 3 is equal to 9. Go ahead and write that down. And then we also, over here, we know our answer could be a negative, right? Because we put a negative number in here. It's still going to equal the absolute value of a positive number, right? It's still going to be a positive number, I mean. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this just a little bit. What we're going to say is still copy down the x minus 3. So x minus 3. But we're going to say it equals a negative number. A negative 9 instead. So the only thing we did was add a negative number here, add a negative symbol here, because we know that our answer could either be positive or negative. And we just need to solve for both of those. Sorry if you guys can hear my dog sneezing right now. All right, so let's go ahead and just solve for these 2 questions. First thing we're going to do is, let's use this. If we have x minus 3 is 9, we know whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. I can't take any variables away or anything, so instead what we're going to do is we're going to go straight to our numbers. So we have a 3 on this side and a 9 on this side. That means since we have a negative 3 here, I'm sorry, I misstated that earlier. So we have a negative 3 here, that means we're actually missing 3, right? So I'm not going to take any numbers away to make this a balanced equation. Instead, I'm going to add a number there. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add 3 here. We did this the other day. And whatever I do to one side, I do to the other, which means we're going to add 3 here. That means we are left with x, negative 3 plus 3 would be a 0, so we don't need to write anything else, is equal to whatever this is. 9 plus 3 would give us 12. So our first answer is x is equal to 12. That's it. That is our very first answer. Just going to go ahead and box that real fast. So x up here could be 12. So 12 minus 3 is 9. And I could go ahead and solve that just to double check it. And that would be true. Over here, we're going to go ahead and solve for this one. This is the negative one, right? So we're going to have a positive answer and a negative answer. Let's just go ahead and balance this out. Now, if we're looking, again, variables, we're not going to do anything to balance each side because we only have a variable on this side. So instead, let's look straight at our numbers. We have negative 3 here, and then we have negative 9 here. If we want to get rid of this negative 3, we know we need to add 3 more to it, right? So it equals 0. So we're going to add 3 here. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So we're going to add 3 here also. That means we're just going to go ahead and rewrite and copy this question down. We have x, bringing it down. We don't need to write anything here because that's going to be 0. So x is equal to negative 9 plus 3. You can use a number line if you wanted to solve that. That would be okay. Instead, I know that if we have negative 9 on a number line, I'm going to move 3 jumps closer to our positive numbers because we're adding 3 to it. And that's just going to give us a 6. But we still have a negative in front of it, right? So x is equal to negative 6. That means our two possible answers are x is equal to 12 and x is equal to negative 6. And we could even solve this by check our work by solving if we just go ahead and put the numbers inside of here. For example, if we have the absolute value and we substitute our number, so 12 minus 3 is equal to 9, and you solve for that, 12 minus 3 is going to give you it's going to give you 9. So that means the absolute value of 9 is equal to 9. And that's true, right? We know that's true. Down here, we could just substitute that number again, so we have the absolute value of negative 6 minus 3 is equal to 9. Let's check that. Negative 6 minus 3. We know really we're going to be adding these two numbers together, right? Because if we have negative 6 on a number line, we're taking away 3, so we're going 3 further to the left on our number line. So that would give us a negative 9. The absolute value of negative 9 is equal to 9. And we know the absolute value is always going to be a positive version of itself, right? It's always going to be a positive number. So that means this is true. So we have two possible answers, or two correct answers. We have x is equal to 12 or x is equal to negative 6. Now, I know that was a lot, especially for the first question. We're definitely going to go over another one just to make sure you guys are set up for success on this. Go ahead and finish copying this work if you need to. Otherwise, just go ahead and wait a second. We're going to get started. If you need to pause, go ahead and pause in the next 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We're going to go ahead and get set up on our next question here. Our next example, sorry about that, that's the same one. Our next question is the absolute value of x minus 4 is equal to 10, okay? So again, we are going to have two possible answers here. So we're going to go ahead and create two separate questions. We know one answer is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. Let's just go ahead and start by copying this down to our first question. So we're just going to copy down x minus 4, but we're getting rid of that absolute value sign. So we're just going to write x minus 4 is equal to 10. And of course, on this side, we know our other answer is going to be a negative answer. So that means we actually need to create a negative equation. So we're going to copy it down, x minus 4. X minus 4 is equal to negative 10, right? Because we're going to have the positive and negative solutions. Let's go ahead and get started on this one, all right? If you feel like you can do it on your own, go ahead and pause it and try that, and then just come back together to solve it, just to check your work. So if we're going to have x minus 4 is 10, we can't do anything with our variables to balance that equation, so instead we're going to jump to our numbers. We have negative 4 here and positive 10 here. If we want this side to equal 0, we need to add 4, right? We talked about this in a lesson all on its own. If you're not quite sure about that, go back and watch that lesson from last week. But we have our plus 4, so we're going to add 4 here. So that way that equals 0. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So we're going to add 4 to this side. That means we're going to be left with x, we know that's 0, is equal to 14. So our first possible answer is x is equal to 14. Let's go ahead and just check it real fast. If we put a 14 inside this equation, so we would have the absolute value of 14 minus 4 is equal to 10. Is that true? Is that correct? Well, 14 minus 4 would give us 10, right? So we would have the absolute value of 10 is equal to 10. So that makes sense, right? That makes sense. So we're good with that one. Now let's take a look at our second equation here. Here, we need to go ahead and we have our x minus 4 is equal to x minus 4 is equal to negative 10. If we want this side to equal 0, right? We want this to get rid of this negative 4, we need to add 4 to it, right? We need to add 4. So we're going to add 4 to this side. It means whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So we have our plus 4 here. And then we're going to go ahead and just bring everything else down. Here, we have x is equal to whatever this is going to be, right? If we solve for this, again, you can take a minute and use your number line if you want to. That's okay. You find negative 10 on your number line, and you're jumping 4, right? 4 to the positive direction. That means this number is going to be a little bit bigger, right? So we would have negative 6 right there. So we have two possible answers here. Again, we have our x is equal to 14, or our x is equal to negative 6. In order to check our negative 6, let's just plug it into this equation and see if that still makes sense. So we would have the absolute value of negative 6 minus 4 is equal to 10. See if that's correct. Negative 6 minus 4, again on number line we have negative 6 and we count 4 smaller, right? Would be negative 10. That means the absolute value of negative 10 is 10, so this is also correct. Our two answers are 14 and negative 6. Go ahead and take a minute to finish copying that work down in the next 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. At this point, remember, it's incredibly important to keep your work as organized as possible, right? We kind of have two different sides here. We have one side for one question or one possible solution, and the second side for our negative solution. We're going to get set up on the next one, but you're actually going to solve for it on your own, and then you're going to just resume the video to check your answer. Our second question here is the absolute value of x plus 7 is 12. Remember, you are going to have two possible solutions, right? We have our two possible solutions here. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. So change this side right here for our positive, it's all going to be the same, but change this side over here to a negative answer. Pause and resume the video when you're ready to check your answer. Pausing in the next 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead, check your work, since you already have two possible answers written down. Here again, we're just going to get rid of that absolute value. So instead, we're just going to have x plus our 7, right, is equal to 12. And here on our negative side, we're just going to change it. So that way it's still x plus 7, but it's equal to negative 12, right? That's the only difference between these two. I'm just going to go ahead and move this up a little bit. Now, let's go ahead and solve for this side. We want this side, we want a variable, right? We have the variable, so we want to keep it over here. Again, we're just quickly checking our answer. So we're going to go ahead and take 7 away from here. That means whatever I do to one side, we do to the other. We get rid of 7 there. We bring everything else down. That's going to end up giving us our x is equal to 5. That's one possible answer right there. X is equal to 5. We'll check it in just a second here. Let's do the other side first, though. On this other side, very similar, but we have our negative on this side, right? So we have x plus 7 is equal to negative 12. Variables on this side, so we want to keep it over there, which means we want this one to be 0. If we have a 7 here, we need it to be 0. We're going to take away 7. So whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. That means we're going to have left over our x. That equals 0. So x is equal to negative 19, right? Let's double check to see if these are actually correct. We're just going to plug them into our equation. So we have the absolute value. Actually, let's just change the colors on these. So we have the absolute value of 5 plus 7 is equal to 12. Is that correct? 5 plus 7 is going to give us 12. So the absolute value of 12 is 12. That makes sense, right? That works. Let's just check this one over here. Here, plugging it in again. So we have negative 19, the absolute value of negative 19 plus 7 is going to give you 12. See if that's correct. Negative 19 plus 7 is going to end up giving you negative 12. The absolute value of that is 12, so this also makes sense. So you have two possible answers. X is equal to 5 and x is equal to negative 19. Just so you guys know, I of course do not expect you to just master this after this lesson. We will be revisiting it, so do not worry. Again, special shout out to those scholars that have been reaching out to me, calling me, or texting me if you guys have questions. So you are making sure that you are still learning and growing. This is all still important information you need to know for this year. Oh, that was Atticus, my dog, yawning right there. And make sure you're still learning and growing. Go ahead, get started on the rest of it. Don't forget your exit ticket. And after that, Freckle, again, today is fractions, working on that. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you guys next week.